The human warrior stood tall, his eyes scanning the grand hall before him. The walls were adorned with alien carvings, glowing in strange colors, their meaning unknown to him. His boots echoed softly against the stone floor as he walked, his mind focused. This was no ordinary meeting. This was the heart of the alien empire, the place where decisions were made, where lives could change in a single moment. His team had come here for peace, but he knew that peace would not come easily. His name was Ethan, a warrior from Earth. Tall and broad-shouldered, he had the look of a man who had seen war. Yet there was a calmness in his eyes that made him stand out among his comrades. Unlike most, he preferred quiet moments to loud victories. Today, however, he was about to step into a situation that would test everything he had learned in his life. At the end of the hall stood the alien queen. She was an imposing figure, larger than any human, with sharp features and glowing eyes. Her silver armor reflected the light of the great hall, and her presence alone made the air feel thicker, more charged. Beside her were her elite guards, their eyes fixed on Ethan and his team with a quiet intensity. Ethan's heart didn't race. He had faced countless battles, but this wasn't about violence. It was about survival. He had been chosen for this mission not because of his strength, but because of his calm under pressure. He could handle the queen's mockery, the arrogance that radiated from her every move. The mission was clear: convince the alien empire to form an alliance with Earth, one that would ensure peace for both worlds. But the queen, she had a reputation, and not for kindness. The meeting began with no pleasantries. The queen's voice echoed across the room, smooth yet sharp. "So this is the human hero," she said, her eyes glinting with amusement. "I was expecting someone stronger." Ethan stood still, his posture straight. He could feel the weight of the queen's gaze on him, but he didn't flinch. He had learned long ago that showing weakness could be a fatal mistake. He didn't need to prove his strength through words or grand gestures. His sword would do the talking if it came to that. "You think your little blades can scare us?" the queen continued, stepping forward. Her voice was like silk, but there was a hidden venom in it. "You are nothing but ants in a world too large for you." The other members of his team shifted uncomfortably. They had heard about the queen's reputation. She was known for crushing the hopes of anyone who dared to challenge her. And yet, Ethan remained calm, unaffected by her taunts. "The mission is peace," he said in a steady voice. "We come to you with an offer. Earth wishes to ally with your empire. Together we can—" "Enough!" The queen interrupted him, her voice rising. "We don't make alliances with weaklings, but I will give you a chance, human. A chance to prove your worth." She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "We'll have a duel. If you survive, perhaps I will consider your offer." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression remained neutral. A duel. It wasn't what he had expected, but it didn't matter. He had fought in countless battles, faced enemies much stronger than himself. A duel with an alien queen would not be the end of him. "You think your weapon is worthy of such a fight?" The queen scoffed, eyeing the blade strapped to his back. "Is that a blade or a toothpick?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to Ethan, waiting for his response. The queen's laughter filled the air, mocking him, yet he remained still. She was trying to provoke him, to see if he would react, but Ethan wasn't so easily baited. He had learned long ago that words were not weapons. His actions would speak louder than any insult. Without a word, Ethan reached behind him and slowly drew his sword. The blade gleamed in the dim light of the hall. It was a work of art, forged by the finest blacksmiths of Earth, designed not only for battle, but for honor. The queen's smile faltered for a brief moment, her eyes locking onto the blade. "This," Ethan said quietly, "is no toothpick." The room held its breath. The queen's expression shifted from amusement to something darker, more calculating. She studied the human warrior carefully, her gaze lingering on his weapon. It was clear that this wasn't just about the duel anymore. It was about power, And if Ethan was to survive this, he needed to prove more than just his strength. He needed to show that humanity wasn't something to be dismissed so easily. "You may be stronger than you look, human," the Queen said, her voice cold now. "But let's see how long you last." She raised her hand, signaling her guards to prepare for the duel. Ethan's fingers tightened around the hilt of his sword. He wasn't afraid. He had come here for peace, but if a fight was what it took, then a fight was what he would give. The Queen gestured toward the center of the room, a wide, open space where the duel would take place. "Come then, human. Show me what you are made of." The tension in the room was thick as Ethan walked toward the center. His heart beat steadily, each step measured and calm. He had fought countless battles in his life, but this one would be different. The fate of Earth rested on the outcome of this duel, and the stakes were higher than ever before. As he stood in the center of the room, facing the Queen, Ethan knew that this battle would not just be about strength. It would be about proving that humanity had a place in this vast, unyielding galaxy, that they could stand side by side with the greatest powers in the universe. And with that thought, the battle began. The Queen stood across from Ethan, her sharp eyes scanning him like a predator eyeing its prey. The massive hall, filled with alien soldiers and dignitaries, had fallen into a heavy silence. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the two figures in the center, the Queen regal and imposing in her gleaming silver armor, and Ethan, the human warrior, standing tall, unflinching in the face of her challenge. "You truly believe you stand a chance against me?" The Queen's voice rang out, a mixture of mockery and curiosity. She was no stranger to power, and her reputation as a formidable fighter had spread across the galaxy. She had crushed countless enemies, humiliated the proud, and vanquished challengers who dared question her authority. Yet something about this human stirred a strange, unfamiliar feeling within her. Was it respect, or something else entirely? Ethan didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained focused, calculating, his fingers resting gently on the hilt of his sword. He didn't need to speak. His actions, when the time came, would do all the talking. The Queen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Very well," she declared. "Let's see if your sword is more than a toy. Guards, clear the arena." The alien guards, massive and armored, their faces hidden behind visors, moved quickly, creating a wide circle around the combatants. The audience shifted uneasily, their collective breath held in anticipation. The air seemed to crackle with energy. Thick with the tension of what was about to unfold, Ethan remained still. He had been in countless duels before, but this one was different. His mission wasn't to defeat the Queen, not yet anyway. His goal was simple: survive. Prove to her, to the galaxy, that humanity was not to be dismissed. He had no illusions about the Queen's strength. She was faster, stronger, and more experienced than he could ever hope to be. But Ethan had something she didn't: resolve. The heart of a warrior who fought not for glory, but for the survival of his people. The Queen raised a hand, and the sound of her voice filled the room once more. "I hope you're prepared to die with dignity, human." With that, she drew her weapon, a long, glowing blade that seemed to hum with power. It was a weapon unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its edges shimmered with energy, and it radiated a faint, otherworldly glow. The Queen's weapon was a symbol of her power, a weapon that had served her through countless battles and victories. Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He unsheathed his own sword, a fine blade forged by the best artisans of Earth. Unlike the Queen's glowing weapon, his sword was simple, forged from steel, and tempered with the sweat of human hands. It was not designed for flashy displays or alien theatrics. It was designed to cut through the enemy, to deliver swift, clean blows, and to survive when all seemed lost. "You're not the first to challenge me," the Queen sneered, "and you won't be the last." Her voice was steady, confident, dripping with the arrogance of someone who had never known defeat. "But your kind is weak. Your weapons are toys, and you will never be able to keep up with me." She lunged forward with surprising speed, her glowing blade aimed straight for Ethan's chest. The crowd gasped, certain that the battle was already over. But Ethan was ready. With a swift motion, he raised his sword, deflecting the queen's attack with a sharp clang. The impact sent a shock through his arm, but he held firm, his eyes locked onto the queen's as she recoiled slightly. She had expected him to falter. She had expected him to hesitate, but instead, she was met with a warrior who stood tall, unyielding. "You're good," the queen said, her voice tinged with genuine surprise. "I didn't think a human could move so quickly." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His movements spoke for him. He circled around her, his blade held, at the ready. His stance was perfect, his body centered, his movements precise. This was what he had trained for. This was his moment to show the queen and the galaxy that humans were not weak. The queen's smile faded slightly as she took a step back, her eyes narrowing in concentration. "You're more than I expected, human," she said. "But you won't survive much longer." She struck again, this time faster, her blade cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. But Ethan was already moving, dodging to the side and narrowly avoiding the strike. His sword flashed, slicing through the air as he attempted a counterattack. The queen parried with ease, her glowing blade meeting his with a resonant clash that reverberated through the hall. The audience held its breath, watching as the two combatants circled each other, their swords clashing in a symphony of steel and energy. The queen's strength was undeniable, but Ethan's skill was unmatched. He had fought battles on Earth, faced enemies far stronger and more numerous than the queen, but he had never given up, never surrendered. The duel continued, each strike from the queen more forceful than the last. But with each blow, Ethan's confidence grew. He could feel the rhythm of the fight, the ebb and flow of their movements. He wasn't just reacting to her, he was anticipating her next move, reading her like a book. His mind was calm, his body in perfect sync with his surroundings. The queen, on the other hand, was beginning to grow frustrated. For the first time in her life, she was facing a foe who wasn't intimidated by her power. She had never fought anyone who stood their ground so firmly, never encountered someone who didn't fear her. She slashed again, her blade humming as it cut through the air. But Ethan, with a calm, calculated move, twisted his body and avoided, the strike coming up on her side and pressing the advantage. His sword swung down in a controlled arc, grazing the queen's armor, leaving a shallow but noticeable mark. For a moment, the queen's eyes widened. No one had ever landed a hit on her before, not in a duel, not in battle. The realization hit her like a cold wave. This human was different, and in that moment, she understood. This wasn't just a duel. This was a test. A test to see if humanity could rise to the challenge, to show that they were worthy of standing alongside the greatest empires in the galaxy. Ethan had proven that he wasn't just a weak human. He was a warrior, a fighter who wouldn't back down. As the two warriors faced off again, the queen's smirk returned. But now there was a hint of something else in her eyes. Respect. Just a flicker of it, but it was there. The duel was far from over, and neither side would give up easily. The clash of blades echoed throughout the grand hall as the queen and Ethan continued their deadly dance. Each strike from her was swift, almost too quick for the eye to follow, but Ethan's movements were just as sharp. His eyes never left her, and his mind stayed clear, calculating his next move. He had fought many battles in his life, but none quite like this. The stakes here were far higher than any battlefield he had ever stood on before. The queen's glowing blade hummed as it sliced through the air, cutting with precision and power. Ethan's steel sword met each strike, the sound of metal on metal ringing out with each clash. It was a battle of strength versus skill, raw power versus calculated precision. The queen was faster, but Ethan was more strategic. And that was his advantage. With a sudden move, the queen lunged at him, her blade aimed for his throat. It was a strike meant to finish him, but Ethan was ready. He sidestepped, feeling the rush of air as the blade passed inches from his skin. His sword came up in a counter, but the queen was already moving back, dodging his strike with a graceful twist. The crowd watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the duel, sensing the danger and the brilliance of the fight. Ethan didn't waste a moment. He knew that if he hesitated, the queen would strike again. His mind was sharp, focusing on her every movement, studying her tactics. He noticed the way she slightly shifted her weight before each attack, the subtle change in her stance that gave away her next move. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to react. As the queen swung again, Ethan ducked low, his sword sweeping across her legs in a low arc. The queen's eyes flashed in surprise as she jumped back, narrowly avoiding the blow. She hadn't expected him to be so bold, so daring. But Ethan wasn't going to let her think she could control the fight. He wasn't just reacting to her anymore. He was taking control of the duel. The queen's eyes narrowed, a hint of frustration creeping into her features. She was beginning to realize that this human wasn't like the others she had faced. She had expected him to fall quickly, to be crushed under the weight of her power, but instead, he was holding his own. For the first time, she felt the sting of uncertainty. It was a feeling she was not used to. But she would not show weakness. She was the queen, and she would not be outshone by a mere human. "You're good," she said, her voice laced with both surprise and disdain. "But your skill won't save you forever." Her blade came down in a vicious arc, aimed straight at his head. Ethan's eyes locked onto her movements, his sword rising to block the strike. The impact sent a jolt of energy up his arm, but he held firm. The queen's strength was undeniable, but her arrogance was her greatest flaw. She underestimated him, and that was something he could use to his advantage. He stepped forward, pushing against her blade, using the momentum to shift his position. The queen staggered back slightly, surprised by his strength. In that brief moment, Ethan pressed forward, his sword striking out. The queen raised her blade to block, but Ethan's sword was already in motion, too fast for her to stop. His blade scraped against her armor, leaving a thin mark across the gleaming surface. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The queen's eyes widened for a split second, a flicker of realization passing through her mind. No one had ever been able to land a hit on her before, not in a duel, not in battle. And yet, here was this human standing tall and showing her that she wasn't invincible. The crowd gasped in surprise, their murmurs rising like a wave. The queen had been struck. The human warrior had done the impossible. But the queen was not one to show weakness. Her face twisted into a snarl as she glared at Ethan. "You dare strike me?" she hissed. "You will regret that, human." With a primal roar, the queen launched herself at Ethan, her blade flashing with deadly intent. This time she wasn't holding back. She was going all in, unleashing her full power. In a flurry of strikes, Ethan barely managed to parry the first few blows, each one coming faster than the last. Her strength was overwhelming, pushing him back, forcing him to the edge of the circle. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't keep up with her power. If he stayed on the defensive, he would lose. He needed to find a way to turn the tables. But how? He had no glowing sword, no overwhelming strength. He only had his wits, his experience, and his resolve. That had to be enough. As the queen's blade came down again, Ethan saw an opening. Her strike was too broad, too forceful. She had overextended, and her balance was compromised. He lunged forward, his sword flashing in the dim light of the hall. The queen barely had time to react as his blade caught her armor once more, this time with more force. The metal groaned under the pressure, and a deep, resonant clang filled the hall. The queen staggered back, momentarily off balance, and Ethan didn't hesitate. He pressed forward, his sword coming up in a sweeping arc aimed at her exposed side. But before his blade could make contact, the queen regained her footing and brought her blade up to block. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," she said, her voice strained. "But it's still not enough." Ethan stepped back, breathing heavily, his body already beginning to feel the strain. The queen was stronger, faster, and far more experienced. But he wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when everything depended on this moment. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He knew that this fight wasn't about defeating the queen. Not yet. It was about proving a point, that humans could stand tall, even in the face of overwhelming power. that they could survive even in the most impossible situations. The queen raised her blade, preparing for another strike. Ethan's fingers tightened around his sword. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold out, but he knew this. He would fight until his last breath. And in that moment, something inside him clicked. He wasn't just defending anymore. He wasn't just reacting. He was ready. Ready to take the fight to her. Ready to show the queen that humans were not to be underestimated. The hour-D battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The queen's eyes narrowed, her focus sharp and unyielding. The flicker of surprise from earlier had passed, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. This human, this warrior, had dared to strike her, not once, but twice. The idea that anyone, especially a human, could challenge her in battle stirred something deep inside her. She had faced the greatest warriors the galaxy had to offer, and she had crushed them all without a second thought. But Ethan, he was different. He had managed to land a blow on her. It was a small mark on her armor, but it was enough to chip away at her pride. No one had ever dared to hurt her in a duel. No one had ever stood their ground as Ethan had. With a growl, she lifted her blade high, the weapon humming with a faint energy as it pulsed to life. The air grew thick with tension, a heavy stillness falling over the hall. The audience watched in silence, sensing that the fight was about to take a dangerous turn. "You dare strike me," the queen hissed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "You will pay for that." Her eyes blazed with fury. In a flash, she moved faster than any human could follow, closing the gap between them with terrifying speed. Ethan barely had time to react before the queen's blade descended upon him like a storm. The force of the blow knocked his sword aside, sending a jolt of pain through his arm. His feet slid backward, struggling to maintain his footing under the weight of her power. But Ethan didn't back down. He dug his heels into the floor, holding his ground even as the queen's relentless assault continued. Her sword came down again faster than before, forcing him to dodge to the side. His muscles burned with the effort, his body screaming for rest, but he kept moving. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. The queen's rage was palpable, her strikes wild and unrestrained. She was no longer the calm, confident ruler that had mocked him at the beginning of the duel. Now she was a warrior consumed by her anger, her every attack fueled by the need to prove her superiority. Ethan saw the change in her, the way her movements became more erratic, more desperate. He could feel her frustration in the air as if the entire hall held its breath. This was his chance. She was losing control, and that was something he could use to his advantage. As her blade swung toward him again, Ethan saw an opening. The queen's wild strike left her momentarily exposed. With a swift movement, he ducked under her blade, narrowly avoiding the deadly swing, and pressed forward. His sword flashed in the dim light of the hall, aiming for her unguarded side. The queen's eyes widened, and she moved just in time to block the blow, but not before his sword grazed her armor once more, leaving another mark. This time, it was deeper, more significant. The queen hissed in pain, the force of the blow causing her to stagger back slightly. For a moment, there was silence. The queen stood there, her chest heaving with rage and disbelief. She had never been hurt like this. Never had she been forced to retreat even for a moment in the face of an enemy, and certainly not by a human. The audience shifted nervously, their eyes flicking between the queen and Ethan. No one had expected this. No one had expected the human warrior to last this long, let alone land such a blow. The tension in the room was palpable, as if the very air was charged with the electricity of the battle. The queen's anger was a living thing now, swirling around her like a storm. She clenched her jaw, her grip tightening around her blade. "You think you can defeat me, human?" she spat, her voice a dangerous snarl. "I am the ruler of this empire. I will not be bested by the likes of you." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. His actions were speaking louder than any words could. He had shown her that he wasn't afraid, that he wasn't going to fall easily. He had proven that he was more than just a human with a blade. He was a force to be reckoned with, the Queen's eyes gleamed with fury, but there was something else there too. A glimmer of something that resembled respect. She was still angry, still determined to crush him. But somewhere deep inside her, a part of her was beginning to understand that this human was different from all the others. He wasn't going to give up no matter what. And that was something she hadn't anticipated. With a roar, she lunged at him again, her blade cutting through the air with terrifying speed. But this time, Ethan was ready. His mind was clear, his body moving with practiced precision. He parried her strike, the sound of their blades ringing out like thunder in the hall. The force of the blow reverberated through his arms, but he didn't flinch. He didn't let up. For every strike the queen made, Ethan was right there, blocking, dodging, countering. He was no longer reacting to her moves, he was anticipating them. He had learned her rhythm, her style. She was a powerful warrior, but she was not invincible. And for the first time in the duel, it was the queen who seemed to be on the defensive. The queen's movements were beginning to slow. She was still fast, faster than any human, but Ethan was keeping up, matching her pace. He could see the frustration building in her eyes. The rage that had fueled her attacks was beginning to turn inward. She was no longer fighting just to win. She was fighting to preserve her pride. Ethan's sword flashed again, this time aimed for her weapon. With a sudden twist, he knocked her blade aside, sending it flying from her hand. The queen stumbled backward, momentarily caught off guard. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The queen stood there, her hand empty, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Ethan stood opposite her, his sword still raised, his body exhausted but resolute. He had disarmed her. He had done what no one else could do. He had forced the queen into a position where she could no longer fight. The queen's eyes locked onto her expression, a mixture of disbelief and something else, a reluctant admiration. She was still the queen, still powerful beyond measure, but now she was facing a human who had earned her respect. The realization hit her harder than any blow Ethan had landed. "You may be stronger than I thought," she muttered, her voice low but sincere, "but don't think this means you've won." Ethan lowered his sword slightly, his chest heaving with each breath. He wasn't foolish enough to think the fight was over. The queen might have been disarmed, but she was still dangerous, still fierce. But for now he had done what he came to do, he had proven his point, and that in itself was a victory. The queen stood still, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to catch her breath. Her once unshakable confidence had been shaken. Her sword, her weapon of power, lay several feet away on the stone floor, beyond her reach. Ethan stood, opposite her, his sword still in hand, his eyes locked onto hers. The entire hall had fallen into an eerie silence, every observer holding their breath, waiting for the next move. The queen's gaze was filled with anger and something else, something far more dangerous: uncertainty. She had never been disarmed before, never faced a foe who made her doubt her own superiority. She had crushed countless opponents, warriors who thought they could match her, but all of them had failed. Now, here was this human, standing tall, sword in hand, unshaken and unbroken. He had shown the impossible. Humans were capable of more than anyone had ever given them credit for. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The queen's eyes flicked toward her weapon, but she didn't make a move to retrieve it. Ethan watched her closely, his grip tight on his blade. His body was sore, every muscle aching from the relentless battle, but his mind was clear. The fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but he had done something no one had ever expected. He had taken the fight to her. "You think this is over?" The queen's voice was low and filled with a strange mix of contempt and respect. "You think you've won just because you disarmed me?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. His actions had already spoken louder than words ever could. The queen was a formidable fighter, but he had proven that humans were not weak, that they could stand their ground and fight back when pushed to the limit. He had shown her that they were capable of standing side by side with the greatest empires in the galaxy. The queen's eyes burned with a fury that had only intensified. She didn't care that she had been disarmed. She didn't care that her pride had been wounded. She was a queen, and no matter what, she would never allow herself to be defeated by a human. With a snarl, she sprang into action. Her powerful legs propelled her forward in a blur, closing the distance between them in an instant. But Ethan was ready. His instincts kicked in, his body moving before his mind could even process what was happening. He sidestepped her charge, narrowly avoiding the queen's attempt to tackle him. The force of her movement sent her crashing into the stone wall, her shoulder slamming into it with a loud thud. For a moment, it seemed like the queen might be disoriented, but she quickly regained her balance. Her face twisted in frustration as she glared at Ethan, who had managed to avoid her attack with ease. She had underestimated him, and now it was clear that her anger was blinding her judgment. She had been fighting with her pride, and that had made her reckless. Ethan didn't give her time to recover. He moved in swiftly, his sword flashing in the dim light of the hall. He struck at her, but the queen was quicker than he expected. She twisted her body, narrowly dodging his blow. Her eyes gleamed with defiance as she pressed forward, her hands now empty but her resolve stronger than ever. "You think a sword makes you strong?" she spat. "I am more than a weapon. I am a queen, and I will not be bested by you." Ethan didn't reply. He couldn't afford to waste time on words. His focus was entirely on the queen and her movements. He knew that the longer this went on, the more dangerous she would become. Her pride had been hurt, and that made her even more unpredictable. The queen lunged at him again, but this time, her attack was different. Instead of striking with raw power, she used speed, trying to overwhelm him with a flurry of quick strikes. Ethan was forced to parry, his sword moving faster than he had ever moved before. He couldn't keep up with her speed indefinitely. Her attacks were relentless, and his energy was starting to wane. But as he parried her latest strike, he saw an opening. The queen had overextended herself, leaving her side exposed for just a split second. Without thinking, Ethan acted on instinct. His sword swept forward in a smooth, controlled motion, striking the queen's side. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was enough to knock her off balance once more. The queen stumbled, her foot slipping on the stone floor, and she fell to one knee. The audience gasped, their eyes wide with disbelief. No one had expected this. The queen, the mighty ruler of this empire, had been brought to her knees by a human. Ethan stood over her, his sword still raised, but he didn't strike. He didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. The queen's breathing was heavy, her eyes filled with fury and disbelief. She looked up at Ethan, the realization sinking in. She had underestimated him from the very beginning, but now she couldn't deny it. He was strong, stronger than she had ever given him credit for. You think you can defeat me?" she whispered, her voice shaky but filled with a new kind of respect. "You are more than I thought." Ethan lowered his sword slightly, his body still tense, ready for anything. The queen's eyes never left his, and for a moment the air between them was thick with the weight of what had just transpired. "Not yet," Ethan replied simply, his voice steady. "But you've lost this fight, and you know it." The queen didn't respond immediately. Her gaze shifted to her disarmed blade, then back to Ethan. She seemed to weigh her options, considering whether to continue the fight or accept the truth of the situation. She was a queen, yes, but she was also a warrior. And warriors knew when to retreat. Slowly, with great effort, the queen rose to her feet. She didn't make any aggressive moves, but her posture remained proud, her dignity intact despite the setback. The hall was silent, every eye trained on the two combatants. The duel had reached its turning point. "I see now," the queen said, her voice calmer though still laced with pride. "I cannot defeat you, not with anger, not with arrogance, but you are still human, and there is still much you do not understand." Ethan nodded, his sword lowered but still at the ready. "We'll find that out together, Your Majesty." The queen didn't reply. Instead, she stepped back, signaling to her guards to stand down. The duel was over, but the true battle, one of minds, of empires, was just beginning. The hall was silent. Every eye in the room was on the Queen and Ethan. The fight had reached its peak, and yet neither of them had delivered the final blow. The Queen stood, her back straight, her eyes still burning with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. Ethan, though weary, was still standing strong. His sword, though lowered, was gripped tightly in his hand. His body ached from the battle, but his resolve was as firm as ever. He had proven his point. Humans were not weak. They could stand up to the might of the greatest empires. The Queen's gaze shifted from Ethan to the disarmed sword that lay, a few feet away, still gleaming under the dim light of the hall. Her chest rose and fell with each breath, but her posture had changed. The fury that had once filled her was now tempered with something else. Perhaps it was the realization that she had underestimated this human. No, all humans. But there was a flicker of something almost resembling admiration in her eyes. "You're more than I thought," the Queen said quietly, her voice no longer filled with mockery or anger, but something more measured. "You've proven yourself." Ethan didn't speak right away. He kept his eyes locked on hers, waiting. The moment felt heavy, almost surreal. Just moments ago, the Queen had been poised to destroy him, to wipe away any hope of peace. Now, here they were, standing across from each other in the aftermath of a brutal, unexpected duel. "I did not expect this," the Queen continued, taking a step back, her voice steady but still tinged with awe. "You have shown me something I did not want to see, something that challenges everything I believed about your kind." Ethan's grip on his sword tightened just slightly, but he remained silent. His thoughts were clear. This was not a victory, won by violence, but by proving that humans had the strength to face impossible odds and survive. It wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about showing the Queen that humanity had value in the universe, that they could be more than just a side note in galactic history. "You have earned my respect," the Queen said, her voice no longer laced with the venom it once carried. "But there is still much we must discuss." Ethan lowered his sword completely, taking a deep breath as he allowed himself a moment of relief. He had fought for peace, for his people's future, and now it seemed as though that might finally be within reach. But the battle wasn't truly over. This duel was only the beginning of something much larger, something far more important than the clash of swords. The room remained still. The alien guards, who had once stood ready to act, were now silent, their eyes flicking between the Queen and Ethan, unsure of what to do. The tension in the air hadn't dissipated, but the outcome was no longer in question. The human warrior had done what no one else had. He had faced the might of the alien empire and lived to tell the tale. "Perhaps," Ethan said, his voice steady, "this is where we begin to understand one another." The Queen looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before she nodded slowly. "Perhaps," she repeated, "but understand this, human. This is not the end. You may have earned my respect, but that does not mean you are now part of our empire. You are still an outsider, and you still have much to prove." Ethan's eyes flicked. To the alien guards, who were still standing at attention, he knew the Queen's words weren't just a warning, they were a challenge. She was offering respect, but she was not going to make it easy. Nothing ever was with her. Yet there was something in her words that suggested a shift, a change. The Queen took a step forward, her gaze never leaving Ethan. "You have done the impossible, and that alone is enough to earn my attention. But let me be clear. A truce is not the same as an alliance." Ethan nodded, understanding what she meant. The fight had been won, but the real work was only beginning. If there was to be peace between their two worlds, they would have to work for it, together. He had already proven that he wasn't just some weak human, some fragile creature to be crushed easily. Now he had to prove that humanity had something to offer. The Queen raised her hand, signaling her guards to stand down completely. The tension in the room eased ever so slightly, though everyone remained aware of the significance of this moment. "I will consider your offer," she said, her tone still regal but with an undertone of something softer, something more like an invitation. But understand, human, this is not just about you. This is about your people. If you are to succeed, your people must show the same strength that you have shown today. Ethan stood tall, his gaze unwavering. I can't speak for all of humanity, he said, but I can tell you this, we're not weak. We're not here to be controlled, we're here to stand beside you as equals. If we can find a way to work together, we both stand to gain. The Queen studied him for a long moment, her eyes flicking to his sword, then back to his face. For the first time since the duel had begun, she seemed to be considering his words carefully, her usual certainty tempered by something new, something that made her pause. You may be right, she said finally. We will see. You have proven that you are not to be underestimated, human. That alone makes you an ally worth considering. The silence in the room deepened as both Ethan and the Queen took a step back, each one considering the weight of the moment. It was clear that the Queen had not fully accepted the idea of alliance, not yet. But there was something in her gaze that hinted that the door was open, just a crack. And that crack, however small, was enough. Ethan looked around the room, his eyes meeting those of his team. They had come here for peace, and now it seemed that they might just have a chance. But it wouldn't be easy. Nothing ever was. And the Queen's words still echoed in his mind. You still have much to prove. As the Queen turned to leave, her guards following closely behind, Ethan remained in the center of the room, his sword still at his side. He had survived the duel. He had earned her respect. But the real challenge was just beginning. If humanity was to survive and thrive in the galaxy, they would have to prove themselves, not through strength alone, but through honor, diplomacy, and cooperation. The Queen glanced over her shoulder as she walked away. Don't think for a second that this is over, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. We may have an agreement, but it is still fragile. Ethan nodded, a small but determined smile on his face. I never thought it would be easy. And with that, the human and the Queen parted ways, each understanding that the true battle, the one for peace and unity, was only just beginning.